thank you so much, everyone. I'd like to start this conversation, Your Excellency, with a question to you. How will you transition Zimbabwe to clean energy, from fossil fuels?
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies. The question is generally, in my view, not particular to Zimbabwe. It's a question that applies across the board. But because you've asked about Zimbabwe, I'll limit my articulation of that question with regard to conditions in Zimbabwe. I must mention first that the situation in Zimbabwe is different from the rest of member states in our region, as well as member states of the AU, because we are a country that is under sanctions for the last 2 decades, and those sanctions are still on. So the way we deal with issues and challenges in Zimbabwe is different from what would happen if there were no sanctions on our country. However, we are very clear that it is necessary for Zimbabwe to move forward. In doing so, we need energy. Now, to have that energy, if we had no sanctions, we would speak about attracting investment into the country. But because of the constraints of sanctions on us, we depend on our own domestic resources in the country, and also from the private sector, global private sector, who are not constrained by the sanctions imposed on us, who are free to move their global capital where they feel the capital is safe. And Zimbabwe is such a destination where it is safe. We would want to grow all the subsectors of the economy. For instance, if you ask me currently as to what is the priority in Zimbabwe, it is food security, which we need in Zimbabwe. But with that food security taking into context the current climate change, we cannot anymore depend on natural rainfall in Zimbabwe.
And one of the challenges, to your point, Excellency, is the situation that you've been enduring because of that, and the water levels having dropped in the major dam that you have in Zimbabwe. You were producing 1,100 megawatts of energy previously, but because of water levels dropping last year, the dam only produced 100 megawatts. So what is it that Zimbabwe is going to do? What are you going to do? What is it that you need?
Well, to be specific, that particular question, we have the Kariba Dam, which was giving us 1,050 megawatts. But because of 2 successive droughts, the dam is so low that Zimbabwe and Zambia have agreed that we should reduce generation of power. With regard to the Zimbabwe side, we have reduced from 1,050 down to something like 108 megawatts. We have lost 900 megawatts on this particular hydro generation power at Kariba. And the rest of our neighboring countries, Mozambique, South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, Namibia, our neighbors also have a deficit in terms of energy. So it is critically important that we find alternatives to have energy. We have gas, but we don't have the capital, we don't have technology to exploit the gas which we have. We have lots of coal to produce thermal power. Yes, of course, currently we have a project going on at Wange, which will give us 600 megawatts. But at the end of the day, it is necessary for us to attract private capital rather than public sector capital. Private capital to come and participate in the generation of power in my country.
Thank you. Prime Minister, what are your priorities in Mozambique and how are you attracting capital?
Muito obrigado. I think that someone will translate for me so that I will be more precise. I will told me that someone will translate. Is correct?
We'll translate for you, please.
Yeah, will someone?
Yes, we have translation.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you so much. Muito obrigado por me dar a palavra. Antes de tudo,
I would like to, first of all, bring the apologies from President News. He would like to be in this event, but he had to deal with other important matters in the country. Secondly, we would like to congratulate the organizers, ECA and all the partners for bringing up this event, this conference, the Business Forum. It's a very important initiative. Our priority in Mozambique is indeed to improve living conditions of our population, which means we have to create jobs for our people, but make sure there is food security and no income for our people. And such objectives are only possible with today's subject under discussion, the energy, power. I was recently in a remote district in my country. We just held elections. I was in campaign there. And in that place where I went, when I reached, it was dark. They had a power plant somewhere, solar energy, and there was no power for almost a month. And then when we got there was light, there was energy, the technical problems were solved. I only listened this noise, wow, from people, and I asked what was going on. I was told it's because there is light now. There is energy, and people are celebrating. Life is back. People from the health sector, they saw that it was possible serve medicines. People from water sources, they would produce water with energy. Agro-processing factories would start working and do their business and process food. Agriculture sector, their machines would roll. Energy, it's a very important asset to fight against poverty. It's very important because with energy everything is possible. Acknowledge that this asset for fighting against poverty and inclusion. We, under the United Nations SDGs, we included energy. And in Mozambique we have only 34% coverage. In 5 years we can increase that, but we'll have to combine that, as they said. We'll have to combine gas, which is available. We have hydro energy, and we are producing and sharing with the region. But we believe that clean energy, renewables are the key for us to be able to reach further. And so the combination of all these with other dams, Pandakua, Kaurabasa, they can allow us to achieve that.
Scott, free to respond also after his answer.
Well, we think there's a lot of opportunities, right? I mean, if you look at both the need as well as what I'll describe as sort of a unique moment in time here, where there's traditionally been a chicken and egg sort of problem for the big institutional investors that we talk to, where many say, well, I can't find a way to invest in Africa. But we're at this moment in time where we're looking for new ways to innovate, new ways to bring packages at scale together, and that's what we're talking about. And if we can do that, it will open the window to those so many investors that want exposure to Africa because they look at their portfolio and they know that they don't have a good representation, and it's such an important growing part of the world. There's another group of investors, I would say, that are very focused on climate change and renewable energy, right? And there's another group of investors, I would say, they're just very focused on making an impact with their investment dollars. So you put all those things together as sort of a unique moment in time where if we can identify these large scalable projects and find new ways to put them together to make it easier for institutional investors to invest in Africa in energy in scale, we can lower the cost of capital too for Africa in doing this. So, you know, I think that's the opportunity in front of us that we see, and we think what excites many of the big investors that we talk to.
Vera, what do you think needs to happen to bring Scott and many more Scots to invest in this space? What do we need to do?
No, I think two things, and I just wanted to take up from what the Prime Minister of Mozambique said. We talk about agriculture. 80% of our economy is in the agriculture sector. But we also know that, and the President of Zimbabwe said, you know, my big problem is food security. But 40% of Africa's agriculture products get lost in storage and transportation. 40%. That is because we don't store the grain in the right temperature, we don't store the nuts under the right temperature, because we don't have the energy. So again, even when we talk about our rural populations, because one may think when we sit here and we talk about energy, it's a little bit of an elite, high-end, let's do it for industry. But as we start talking about leave no one behind, and we start with the agriculture sector, already 40% to irrigate in the event that we don't have to wait for the rains. If we want to irrigate, we need 20% energy to do the irrigation and 40% energy to store. So you can just see how important this conversation is for those that we want to make sure that we don't leave behind with food security and in our rural populations. So what needs to be done? I think very often when governments make policy around energy, and as Ngozi said, you know, we put subsidies. But I'll tell a story that is her story almost. But we subsidize the other end. We end up subsidizing those who own private planes with a different kind of fossil fuel, as opposed to subsidizing, you know, the people who really need it. She's laughing because we had actually looked at it a little bit and then realized that that's where a lot of the fossil fuel subsidies go to the high-end guys who have their planes on runways, and not to the people who need to store goods. So the first thing is to really look at the progressive nature of our tax system. Because again, you know, a lot of governments would say, oh, we can't pay for it, we can't afford it. The second one, and it's something that we did in Senegal, is essentially, and it's the same in France and many other countries, you have to criminalize non-payment of tariffs. Because the reason governments subsidize is because nobody pays the energy bill. And so when the energy bill is not paid, the government has to step in. When the government steps in, the utility falls. So again, ensuring that everybody can pay their bill. Now in countries like Kenya, in countries like Tanzania, I think also in Zimbabwe, you pay your bill electronically and you do pay as you go. So that problem is being solved. And these are two things we need to make sure that we do, is take away the subsidy and then ensure that we get the right generation in place quickly. As Allah said, with the private sector, because it is the private sector that is going to lead this.
And Vera, when it comes to political will, what is it that our government leaders need to do?
First, they just need to know that it's doable. They need to know that if they partner with the private sector while creating a good, conducive business environment, as Alain said, we can do solar in 18 months now. You don't need to wait 2 years or 3 years. In some cases, even in a year and a half, it can get done. So the first thing is, do not be shy of the private sector. Make sure first you have a conducive environment, but we have 5 countries every year in the top 10 of the doing business. Togo this year was leading with 40 points. I think once we do that, investors like PIMCO and the rest will come, and then we know how to do it. We still need to do the last mile and get to those rural populations that far away, and those ones need subsidies. But if we continue to subsidize the cities and have all these regressive taxes on the cities, we cannot reach those who really need the subsidy and who really need public investment and not private investment.
Excellency, Prime Minister, I'd like you to respond to that. What are your thoughts?
Well, first and foremost, I think every African leader realizes that for the modernization of our economy or industrialization of our economies would require energy. Secondly, I think we all have an environment conducive to attract private capital to generate energy in our countries. There are 3 levels. The first level is the generation of power itself. That's where we must begin. Then the second task would be its transmission. And the third is its distribution. Now, for Zimbabwe, the challenge is generation, the first level. We need to have private capital to come to Zimbabwe to generate energy, either hydro, solar, or thermal. Of course, thermal now, with what is happening, it may not be the best. But we need people at that level first before we talk about its transmission, its distribution. We precisely know where we want to use it. For our agriculture, as I said, with climate change, we need energy to drive and modernize our agriculture. We in Zimbabwe are lucky we have abundant minerals, but we also need energy to exploit or extract those minerals. Furthermore, infrastructure development in the country, it could be tourism, manufacturing. For us, for the last 2 decades, our industry, our manufacturing sector collapsed as a result of the sanctions which we had. But now to revive, we need energy in that area. And because most of our economies are primary economies, we need to move from that and process our goods, value addition of our goods, and that cannot be achieved until and unless we have energy to do the value addition in the value chain. So it is critically important that we begin at the correct level, that is generation. The question of vision, the question of willpower, I don't think that it is, we have a deficit in that area. We know what we want to achieve, but it is the means which we would want to have. I'm happy that a forum like this one exposes us as leaders to possibilities that are there. I didn't know that there was a company like the gentleman sitting there, Mr. Scott.
Scott, he's right here.
Yes, he's seated there, Mr. Scott. He is running a over 2 trillion fund. I've never had it in my region. So the entire, I think the entire African continent GDP is about that, which is in the hands of one company. So we want you in our region, and I think that in energy, definitely you will make your profits.
Scott, were you to invest in Zimbabwe or Mozambique, any other African country, but since we have Zimbabwe and Mozambique here enticing you to come, what is it that you need to be reassured by our leaders to enter these countries? Like, you can ask them questions directly if you wish.
Yeah, I think it's, well, a couple of thoughts. One is many of the big institutional investors that we do business with would like to minimize risk through greater diversification. So they need us to find a way to do multiple things in multiple countries in Africa at once. That's one way to think about it. The other way is to think about new ways to lower project risk, and whether that's through finding innovative ways to get guarantees, to get more risk sharing between the public and the private sector. That's very important as well. And obviously, the enabling framework. There needs to be sort of a roadmap for investment for investors so that they can understand the complete framework and have confidence that it's going to be stable, long-lasting, and productive for them as investors. So I think, you know, my questions revolve around those things. You know, how can we find ways to get multiple countries working together in a similar framework, right, so that it can be scaled up and investors can understand it, so that it's not a different framework in every project in every country.
Prime Minister, perhaps you can address those points.
Muito obrigado. Eu queria fazer minha.
I would want to align myself with what my comrade from Zimbabwe has said and that of Ngozi. We are losing time. We have to work fast. I was expecting a question from Scott. When are you going to go to Zimbabwe or Mozambique?
Everything is there. We have resource, we have visions for our leaders, President Mnangagwa, President Nyusi, and the other president that had a vision. They need to industrialize their economies, they need to have agriculture, they need to do development. So we have everything. We have a resource over there. What we need now is to join hands. We as a Mozambican, Zimbabwean, with the Scott and other private sectors, so that we can act fast and quick. We have regulators. We have regulators in framework. We have a legal framework over there. We have all the attractive package of, we have macroeconomic stability. We have a very good vision of our leaders. So, Mr. Scott, let's go together today. Today. And then with your 3 trillions of all US billions, with the President Mnangagwa, we have to join some project and go ahead. Can you agree with me?
Much to talk about.
And what about Zimbabwe?
Well, Mr. Scott has raised the issue of where you would want to see collective cooperation in the areas of energy. In our region, southern region, we have the southern region energy pool. We have a SADC energy pool, which deals with the requirements and the needs of the entire 15 countries put together. So if you came to our region, it's not only Zimbabwe that will say this is what we want. We are able to expose to you that we have deficit of energy to the extent they say 16,000 megawatts. Around as to where you decide the plant or the investment so that you give us the 16,000 deficit in energy. And the southern pool, which is our energy pool, will be able to distribute it to the rest of the other 15 countries. So we are actually very well coordinated, but the challenge is still that we don't have adequate private sector investment in the region to produce the energy which we want.
Vera?
Now, thank you very much. The President has raised something which is quite important, which is the energy power pools. We have a number of energy power pools on the continent, and I think that by using those energy power pools, we can actually do what we're talking about here, which is the speed in a faster way. So working on a power pool in Zimbabwe that can then give energy to Zambia, Botswana, and all of the southern cone. We have the West Africa power pool, of course, the East Africa power pool. And I think as we work with Scott, first we need to fix the regulatory environment. That is really, ECA is doing 2 things. We're crowding in financing, but we're also working on the policy side. And I think we need to ensure then that when we do the power pools, we can ensure that the regulatory environment is good. So on the continent, we have have successful power pools. We can do better, we can do faster. And I think when we have investment scale, we also urge our policymakers to see not just how we do the national pools, but to do the energy diversification across the different power pools, with sort of gas maybe coming from someplace. And I know that Ngozi and Alan talked a little bit about gas, and Scott doesn't want to hear about gas, but this is the importance of the conversation, because Africa is in this transition period, and we're very happy that we have the people like Scott that are going to finance the purely green, 100% renewables, but we hope that we can also crowd in some financing for the transition energy that we will be able to put in this process, and our power pools are the best way to do this energy mix.
I'd like to open up the discussion for a few minutes to Q&A from the audience. If anyone has a question they'd like to ask, could you raise your hand and just state your name and affiliation and ask a concise question. We have a couple of roving microphones, so let's take this gentleman on my left-hand side first. And once again, if I may ask you to just state your name, affiliation, and please keep your question short.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mohammed Musa Omran, First Under Secretary, Ministry of Electricity and Energy in Egypt, and also represent Africa and African-EU Energy Partnership. I'm the focal point for North African country in Africa, Africa Renewable Energy Initiative. And I would like to highlight something about Africa Renewable Energy Initiative for the audience, because it's very important to know what's ARI. ARI is an African initiative supported by the head of states, and also the board of Africa Renewable Energy Initiative consists of 5 head of states, headed by His Excellency Professor Alpha Conde from Guinea, and also President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, President of Chad, President of Namibia, and also President of Kenya.
So did you have a question for our
I don't have a question, but
yes.
I would like to highlight this because this is very important, because this is the south of Africa in renewable energy, and I would like to ask all African countries to submit their proposal for projects, because till now we succeeded. Africa Renewable Energy Initiative has 2 targets. The first target to have 10 gigawatt by 2020, and we succeeded target, and we have also 300 gigawatt as a target by 2030. We have now about 600 projects from Africa, from all African countries, as a liberalized project, and we are ready to cooperate with others to have more projects from Africa. And also I would like to highlight the experience of Egypt in this regard. As my colleague said in the first panel, that we succeeded to have 1,500 megawatt.
Could we just stick to questions specifically, please? I'll take this gentleman on my right-hand side next, and then I'll come to the middle of the room. Question.
I've come here to raise a question as well as to make comments.
In the interest of time,
my name
just be concise with your comment.
My name is Pisatian Mengistu. I'm a professor with 50 years of experience in the area of taxes, investment, and finance in Africa. The question is, I do understand that Africa has an abundance in potential in terms of not only solar energy, but also on other minerals and resources. The question is, it's also one of the poorest continents in the world. Whom are we going to blame? Is it our leaders? Is lack of technology, lack of leadership, or what? Is a question which I want to forward. The second one, I'd very much like to say that public-private partnership must be the...
That was a technological flaw, not a deliberate. Okay.
Trying to bring to minds green capital technology as well as the government. That, as you mentioned, for example, solar, thermal, and many others.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sir, thank you. Thank you.
I think, Professor, that was a very good question. Thank you very much. Who is to blame? a little bit of all of us. As I said, some of us don't pay our energy bills on time, and that's the rest of. But I think we must say that Africa has made huge improvements. In many countries now, access to energy is above 50–60%. The private sector has had a perception issue on the continent. They felt that Africa was a risky destination, which is why we are also bringing the private sector to come and see that, you know, we are the last most attractive destination. When you go to Europe today, when you go to the United States, rates of return on investment are 1, if not 0. When you come to the continent, on energy investment, we're talking at 8 to 12% risk-adjusted rate of return. So it is a no-brainer that you should come to the continent to invest. If you're looking for new renewables, you have to come here. So I think once we bring that combination of the public sector with the right policies, all of us in this audience paying our energy bills accordingly, and the private sector trusting to come and invest, we have that trio that will work, and I think that's what we're trying to do here today.
And Excellency, the second point on public-private partnerships, did you have anything you wanted to add on that or comment?
I'd like to say happy with the question you have put forward. This is why we have goals. These issues are not an event but a process. What is critically important is for us to know where we want to go and how to go there. Now, you are putting a question as relating only to the ultimate goal. That is that every African country should have those things in place. Our economies are not at the same level in terms of development. Resources at our disposal are not the same. But our vision and our wish and our policies to create an Africa that we want, we are agreed. So the journey is that we must have a conversation among ourselves as to how do we walk this journey to reach the goal we want for our continent. Thank you.
And Prime Minister, you can perhaps address the point on regional integration. That was the third point, and then I'd like to take a couple more questions.
Sim, eu vou ser rápido. Concordo com o presidente Mnangagwa, concordo com a doutora Vega, porque
And in Ngozi, because progress in Mozambique, we have started that 40 years ago with 3% of access, and now we have gone to 34%, and we think over the next 5 years we're going to double that. And what has just been said, when it comes to the perception of risk in Africa, I also agree with Scott. Actually, I was looking at that. He would say we would look at things carefully. We need to do that, and we need to ensure that we do that, and we have to be urgent, fast, and try and address these matters in a forum like this one, because Africa doesn't have the risk that people think, and we should actually transform this project into reality. And it's been 2 years now, and we've been doing public-private partnership in solar energy, and I think we can do that. We are pretty able to do that. All we need to do is to do things calmly and see where we cannot lose money, because the investors don't want to do that.
From this gentleman right in the middle of this section of the room. If I may request for you to just keep your question tight and your name and your affiliation. And
Hello. I do have a question, no comments. My name is Ronnie Franzen. I'm representing an association in Montreal, Canada, the REPAF, which mission is to help Canadians of African descent build bridges with Africa. So my question to your excellencies and to the host here is, can you please elaborate more on the current strategies or the upcoming strategies that you may have to attract the funding from diasporas living abroad? And the reason for that, and I'm going to make it short, the reason for that is I came with a delegation from Canada that was led by Prime Minister Trudeau, and Amongst our members, we flew 17 hours. We have people from that live here. We have people from all around the world. We love Africa and we want to help. So I make it short. Thank you.
Thank you. So how are you going to engage, or are you engaging the diaspora? Sorry? Sorry, just can you respond first, and then we'll be happy to take the question.
Well, I will speak about Zimbabwe. Wherever I go outside Zimbabwe, I meet Zimbabweans in the diaspora. Our people are in the diaspora for various reasons. But at the end of the day, Zimbabwe still remains their home. Some have acquired skills they wouldn't have acquired back home. Some have been exposed to technologies which they would have never been exposed to back home. So we say to those in the diaspora, let us have a platform where we can exchange ideas and find a way of how they can benefit their home country. We are open to discussion, we are open to new ideas. That's the only way to go.
One country that's done that very successfully is Rwanda. Would Your Excellency like to comment on what Rwanda has done with the diaspora? Could somebody please give the Minister a microphone?
Thank you. Actually, I don't want to share the experience of Rwanda and its successes, but maybe about the challenges of Rwanda and Africa in relation with access to clean and affordable energy. This initiative, SDG 7 initiative for Africa, is very, very important, as is the SDG 7 itself for Africa. Access to clean and affordable energy is very, very important for the whole Africa. All the aspects have been touched on, but I want to come back to a few aspects which were not, in my view, emphasized, were not highlighted enough. One of them is SDG 7 in relation to climate change and deforestation. We know that in Africa, at least in Rwanda, more than 80% of people are cooking with firewood and charcoal. And that means that we are cutting trees in volumes every day, and it is causing problems. You cannot keep the pace in terms of reforestation, as more than 80% are using firewood and charcoal. The other thing is that using firewood and charcoal means also air pollution. And most of our people are exposed to air pollution, and most of them in Africa, it is a reality, most of them are women, and eventually the kids they are keeping on their back. So it is very important. Air pollution is causing millions of deaths every year in Africa. So it is important that Africans access to clean and affordable energy so that we can also deal with climate change challenges. Otherwise, energy, electricity is transformative. It is an enabler for many other sectors. When we have electricity in rural areas, we will see that entrepreneurship is real on our continent. You will see small businesses starting straight away, like from beauty salons to welding workshops and many others. And I don't talk about the impact on the education sector, the health sector in terms of refrigerations of drugs and vaccines, and the agriculture sector in terms of post-harvesting management of our products. So it's important. The other point I want to touch on is related to the transition. You know that countries like Germany have requested for 18 years to transition from coal. I believe that in Africa we need more than 18 years to transition through gas. Because, yes, liquefied natural gas is important for us to be able to transition from firewood and charcoal, and they use gas for cooking. So those are, for me, important points I wanted to come back to, and I need also to highlight that Africa has abundant resources in natural gas. When you see the Prime Minister of Mozambique who is here, you know that that resource is really abundant on our continent, and we need to advocate for a transitional period. Let's not just talk about clean and renewable energy, but we need a transition through liquefied natural gas to be able to deal with climate change and to be able to catch up in terms of development with other continents. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask each of our panelists to offer a final thought. Scott, let me start with you. What is the most important thing you'd like everyone in the room here to take away from today, from your point of view?
Well, from my point of view, it's that the private sector, there's been a big transformation in the private sector in terms of thinking about sustainable issues and how they think about trying to get exposure to Africa. So yes, it's my company and the investors we talk to, but talk to all of our competitors. The same thing is happening. So I think it's a unique moment in time, and we should seize this opportunity and really find continued ways to work together to solve these problems.
Prime Minister?
According to Scott, we expect to work together so that we can translate this common desire to make things happen, to translate into practical issues. And we have to work on the legal environment and political environment as well. We want to work on that so that we can make things happen. And we were going to work on those issues that the investors want so that they can feel safe and we can move forward.
Well, thank you. I think what is critically important for Africa is to know where Africa wants to be, where it wants to go. After identifying where we want to go and the challenges which we face going there, then there must be conversation among ourselves to get the priority roadmap as to reach where we want to go. And this can only be achieved through debate and workshopping, networking among ourselves. But critically, I should say, we must be agreed as to where we want to go as a continent and identify the needs, prioritize those needs, then we walk the talk.
Vera?
The SDG 7 initiative that we're launching here today with Scott, PIMCO, and Africa 50 and DBSA, I think clearly we have agreed in this conversation that is important for the continent. The question is how quickly, how fast can we scale that? And we hope that together with the leaders in the room, we will put in place the right business environment so that between now and the end of the year, we're able to come back to you and say, this is what we've been able to do. I think we've visited a few countries already. We have 8 countries on the list. We're looking for more to put on that list. You heard Scott, with $2 trillion, there is a lot we can put on that list and ensure that Africa's industrialization, Africa's diversification, we need to create 13 million jobs a year. We cannot do that if we do not have the energy that we need. And I think most importantly, the African Union theme this year is silencing the guns. One of the reasons why we cannot silence the guns is because our youth don't have jobs. Our youth don't have jobs because the energy is not there to create the industry and the service industries that they need to work. So we hope with this initiative and with the leadership of the SG, that we can really make renewable energy and the financing of renewable energy a reality for the continent in a very short space of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, a warm round of applause for our panelists. Thank you for your insights, your time, and coffee right now, and then reconvene in a few minutes. Thank you.